I do want to level set your expectations here. Obviously, in the next hour, I won't be able to talk about everything involved in ensuring the maximum uptime and performance of your vCenter server appliance. But if you did look at the catalog, I did specify that I would be taking a look at 2 tools to help you accomplish these things. These tools are the VAMI toolset and Vimtop. My name is Tom Fenton. I'm a columnist for Virtualization Cloud Review, and I write for StorageReview.com as well. However, my daytime job is I'm a course developer for VMware Education Department. We're the folks that put together the training that our trainers go out to deliver to you guys. And I hope all of you had a chance to take a few of those classes. Before we get started, by a raise of hands, how many of you guys have ever used Vimtop? Okay, and of those who've used Vimtop, how many of you have taken the historical data and done anything with it? Great, you guys are the ideal audience for this session. I found that a lot of people haven't been exposed to Vimtop. It's been around for 5 years, but not a lot of people have used it. And moreover, I didn't think I saw anyone raise their hand that actually took this historical data and did any kind of trending analysis with it. So I do have 3 main goals for this session. First, I want to acquaint you with VAMI tools and Vimtop and how you can use it to evaluate your server appliance and spot abnormalities in it. Second, I'm going to show you how you can use Vimtop to collect historical data and then use charting mechanisms to display it in a little bit more attractive manner. And then third, as I go through this session, I'm going to give you examples of how I use these tools to spot abnormalities in my VCSA and how I deal with them. In order to accomplish this, I've broke this session down into 5 different sections. First, going to talk just a little bit about VCSA, why it's important, what it's composed of. And then I'll talk about VAMI tools, some of the tools that you can use with it. And then we'll start getting into Vimtop, what it does, how to use it. Then I'll show you how to create data, historical data from Vimtop, and then export it into Excel spreadsheets or use Windows Perfmon so you can get a better understanding of it in a graphical environment. Then I'll wrap all this up by showing you a couple of workflows I used using these tools to detect some issues that I was having on one of my servers. Today's data center is vSphere-centric. That's why you guys are here for the most part. vSphere, very powerful tool. And at the heart of this is the VCSA, the vCenter Server Appliance. Controls a lot of things, tells the ESX host what to do. You tell the vCenter server what to do, and then it has some automated processes in there, and moves virtual machines around as it sees fit. So very, very important. And if the VCSA is performing less than optimally, or if it goes down, can really affect your entire business. That's kind of the bad thing. The good thing is that even though if VCSA does go down, your ESX hosts for the most part they won't go down. They'll still be operational. You might not be able to start up new VMs, things like that, but things should be running normal until you can bring your VCS back up or get it back into the performance that it needs. The VCSA can be composed of 2 different components, the vCenter server component and the platform services controller. I just read the other day that you used to be able to break them out. Going forward, they're going to be shipped as a single unit. You won't be able to have a separate platform services controller. But now you can actually have 2 different VMs that one's running the vCenter server and the other one's running the platform service controller. vCenter server, probably the most important piece up there is the database. Database does things, it collects the inventory on the ESX host. It, let's see, what else does it do? It stores your RBAC information, performance data, pretty much any critical information that's going on in your vSphere environment gets stored in the database. It is a Postgres database. It's proven to be extremely reliable, extremely resilient, and extremely scalable. Right now, we recommend that you use the embedded database in all but some really niche cases. Underneath that, we have the VPXD. VPXD does the main business logic in your VCSA. It takes the API calls that you give it and either writes stuff to the database or sends the information out to the ESXi host. In the early days, the real early days, the VPXD was kind of a problem child. You'd have to restart it every once in a while and you'd have to do crazy stuff to it. But in the last 8 years, it's really stabilized. Seems to be a very good process. And then we have the interfaces, whether you use the vSphere client or the vSphere web client. The vCenter server is the back end for those, provides information for that. The vCenter server also takes care of the content library. It takes care of creating the performance charts, storage profile services. Yeah, just a bunch of things. A lot of services are running on that. And we need to make sure those services are getting the resources they need and making sure that they don't overconsume resources. Then we have the platform service controller. It connects with the Active Directory. It does the integration with the Active Directory. It does the single sign-on, does licensing, does all the directory services. So we have a lot of stuff going on in the vCenter Server Appliance. This is what it looks like in the big picture. We have in this case I broke them out into 2 different VMs. We have the platform service controller and the vCenter Server Appliance. We have the database running in the vCenter Server Appliance. And these guys run on Photon OS. Photon OS is a Linux distribution. It's a bespoke Linux distribution that was created and maintained by VMware. It's extremely performant, extremely reliable, and it's extremely stripped down. You can get the bits for Photon OS, but if you try and install them on bare hardware, you aren't going to have any luck because they stripped all the drivers, everything out of it that really doesn't enhance its ability to run on the ESX hypervisor or other hypervisors as well. Yeah, extremely reliable, extremely robust operating system. It runs on the ESX host, which runs on bare metal. And then you have over here the vSphere clients that talk to the VCS, and the VCS talks to the managed host and virtual machines. So that's kind of the big picture overview of that. So when we talk about making sure that this is running optimally and doing what we want it to do, we have to remember we're looking at 2 different things. First, it is a virtual machine, so we need to take a look at the big picture. Make sure the virtual machine is running right. Make sure that it isn't over-consuming CPUs, getting the resources it needs. And then when we do see that we are having problems with it, we need to dive into it and take a look at the processes that are running in it. So we have 2 different tool sets that we do those with. As it is a virtual machine, we need to take a look at it and consider what it needs: CPU, memory, networking, storage, pretty much everything you worry about with regular virtual machines. But we also have this database, very important database that we need to look at and make sure it's running well. The VCS does have a couple hard limits. First, it can only have 640 concurrent operations running on it at the same time. When you hit that 640 mark, then it goes ahead and buffers and back up. And you can only have 2,000 concurrent logins. Probably thinking, yeah, that's a lot of logins. What you don't realize is, every Power CLI shell, that's going to take a login. Every time someone logs in, using vSphere client, that takes a login. So when you do hit that 2,000 login limit, it just blocks those and you'll get a login refused message. To monitor the virtual machine itself, we use something called the VAMI tools, the vSphere Appliance Management Interface. To get to the VAMI, you put in the URL IP of your vCenter server and then append 5480, that's the port that's listed on. You go ahead and log in as root, and you use the root password that you set when you installed the VCSA. Bring up a screen, looks something like this. There's 2 things that you can do preventively to make sure that you're getting the most uptime and performance from your VCSA. The first is to make sure it's updated. VAMI tool makes it real easy to update this. You click on the update tab, say check updates, that's that blue box in the upper left-hand corner. It brings down all the patches that are applicable to your VCSA. Then it gives you the option of looking at it. It tells you whether a reboot's required, how big it is, when it was released. Interestingly enough, I just updated to 6.7 U1, and on the update, it wasn't specified as U1, it was 6.7.0.200, or 2000. And so you need to go in and look in my VMware and see which update, if you're going to go up to an update like that. But anyway, so it tells you whether a reboot's required, what kind of patch it is, whether it's a fix, whether it's critical or not. If a reboot is required, you're going to have to plan downtime around that, figure out when it works for you. But even if it says a reboot isn't required, that doesn't mean that it isn't going to stop services and go ahead and restart those services. You might have a real brief period of time when a service goes down, then comes back up. So you probably want to plan around that as well. From there, you can either pick stage or stage and install. If you pick stage, it downloads those bits to you locally, and then you can give it the install and go through and install it. Real easy to use. And like I said, this is probably the biggest thing you can do to make sure that your VCSA is running well and performant. The other thing you really need to do is back up your VCSA. Things happen. Disks go bad, bits get corrupted. There's a lot of great third-party backup tools that do this, but if you don't have those, aren't using this, we supply one. It's an enterprise-level backup tool, real easy to use. With the vSphere 6.7, with 6.5, the scheduling interface was a little bit wonky, didn't give you a whole lot of options. With 6.7, you have a really nice scheduling interface. The way we do backups is kind of interesting. We don't back up the whole virtual machine, we just take the data off it. It makes it real data efficient. You don't have to back up a lot of stuff you don't need. And then when you do a restore, you actually reinstall your VCSA, gives you a nice minty fresh VCSA to work with, and then you bring in the data on top of it. Real easy to set up, real easy to use, and it's free. So those are the two biggest things you can do to kind of proactively prevent it. Keep it patched and keep it backed up. So once that's done, you're going to want to monitor the virtual machine. And yeah.
Do you need to restore to the exact same version?
Yes, you do. Yep, and then you can update if you need to, but yes. Good question, thank you. And the VAMI tool does have monitoring tools. Got to take a look at your CPU and memory. That seems to be where we have most issues. Processes go rogue, they get stuck, things like that. And so we have this nice tool here, allows you to do it. The top charts for the CPU, the bottom charts for the memory. Like all other graphs, you can hover over a point and it'll tell you the time and the percentage of it being used. You want to keep your CPU utilization 70, 80% most of the time. If it spikes above that for short periods of time and then floats back down, that's okay, that's to be expected. But if you see either, elevates and keeps that way, you're having problems, or a lot of times we simply see it trend up over time as you add more resources, you add more ESX servers to it, you start doing more with your VCSA, it's going to consume more CPU. Memory is a little bit trickier because programs tend to reside in memory until they're needed, so it kind of hovers around 80, 90%. You don't see a whole lot of fluctuation in it. You need to become familiar with what's normal on your system. For example, this is my home server. One morning I logged in, and I just don't do a whole lot with my home server. And I usually run about 5% utilization. And one morning I logged in and saw that it jumped up to 50% utilization. What's going on here? Did something go rogue? Then it occurred to me, I ran Horizon on this. I was doing a recompose at that time, so started to suck through a lot of CPU cycles. So even if you do see something that's abnormal, doesn't mean that it's not expected. So you need to get a good picture of everything that's going on in your environment so things like this don't surprise you. We don't really see a whole lot of issues with networking performance with the VCSA itself, but we do see issues downline. We do have a monitoring tool to monitor various aspects of your networking. You have to go through, see that little button down there? There's a list of 20 of them. You have to kind of go through each one independently and click it. We don't have one overviewing chart of it, so you have to go through them. The things I like to look at are for dropped packets. If you have dropped packets, might mean that you're having some networking issues downline, maybe some bad hardware. Also latency, take a look at your latency. If all of a sudden you start getting some funny latency, maybe your network's getting real busy, or maybe something got misrouted. So keep an eye on those things. Again, you gotta know what's normal and what's expected. One evening, I logged onto it, and again, home server, not doing a whole lot of stuff. All of a sudden I saw this huge spike in this, the transmit byte rate. Again, this is my home server, not doing a whole lot. I got thinking, what changed? What happened there? And I took this chart right before VMworld Las Vegas, and then it occurred to me, about an hour before, I thought it'd be great to be able to dial into my VCSA, maybe look around, get charts, things like that. So why don't I just open up a port on my home network so I could access it? Yeah, within an hour, I had people from all over the world wanting to access my VCSA, using all sorts of passwords, all sorts of names, all sorts of things to gain access to it. Yeah, I was being hacked. So I went ahead and shut that down, and it returned to normal. Again, you gotta know what's normal, you gotta know what's not normal. We can also take a look at the storage utilization, not the activity, but the utilization. How full are your disks getting? This is based on a Linux distribution, has the partitions, you probably recognize them all there. Linux and file systems in general don't behave real well when you get to 80–90%. So you want to make sure that you keep that threshold below 80–90%. If it does go above that, we do have KB articles that tell you either how to clean out that data or how to extend the partition. Again, on my home system, I make a lot of mistakes on my home system. I noticed that my partition was getting to 80%, and this was a fresh install. I'd only been running it for maybe 6 months. And I was wondering why. Took a look on it, realized that it was my log partition, started taking a look at logs, and it occurred to me that about 4 months ago, I was working on the vRealize Log Insight course. I wanted to generate a lot of data, so I set my debug level up to the highest debug level, and it filled up my log file over time. So I went ahead and set my debug level back down to info, error, cleaned out these logs, and I was using 5–10%. But I wouldn't have realized it if I wasn't checking these charts. By the way, this chart, it sorts by disk by default, and you probably want to sort by utilization. Again, just click utilization, and that'll show you the fullest disks first. This is probably the most important screenshot in this presentation, because there isn't a whole lot of other ways to get this information. This shows you how full your database is getting. And so you want to pay attention to it. The top graph there shows you the seat statistics, the statistics, tasks, events, and alarms, how full it's getting. And then the lower one shows the overall usage. The overall usage includes the seat stuff, the database, core database information, and the database logs. So you're going to want to monitor this, make sure your database doesn't get filled up. Again, you notice that you start getting full. We do have KB articles on there. Call tech support. They can walk you through cleaning it out or extending it. Most important slide in this deck. With the VAMI tools, we get to look at the overall machine, the virtual machine itself, get to see how busy it is with the CPU, memory. But when we do find that we have a sudden spike in CPU utilization or disk utilization, we want to kind of dig in, figure out why that's happening. This is where Vimtop comes in. Vimtop was first, well, before Vimtop, we didn't have a lot of tools to look at these processes, so you found yourself doing, grep, sed, awk, sort, blah, blah, all these crazy commands to kind of figure out what was happening with your VCSA, what was happening with the processes that are running on your VCSA. In 6.0, they released the first Vimtop. It was limited, it wasn't very good, the switches didn't work real well, but it gave us something. VMware worked on it. 6.5, you got actually a pretty usable product. Some of the switches still didn't work quite right. And then in 6.7, seems like all the switches work right. And it is a real valuable tool that no one knows about. If you're familiar with Linux top, ESX top, it's the same type of tool, has a lot of the same commands. Not as feature rich as ESX top. I did showed the switches for ESX top, and you have a dozen of them. Vimtop only has 6 switches. But with these 6 switches, we can do some real interesting things. You access Vimtop from the console. I tend to use the SSH shell to dial into it. And to access the SSH shell, you do have to enable it. You go to VAMI tool, go to access, SSH, edit, and enable it. I like to enable the bash shell as well, because if you're going to pull any information from it, any files from the VCSA, you need to have the bash shell implemented as well. You can also enable the SSH from the vSphere client or from the command line. So you're going to SSH in, get to it, log in as root with your password, and then type in Vimtop, bam, comes up. I do a -H, gives you the 6 switches and what they do. The help will just display the help index. A lot of times when someone's talking to me and saying, hey, this doesn't work like you said it is, I have them run Vimtop-V, and they're usually on a backdated version, so that's why the switches aren't working as well. We'll talk about the rest of these switches as we go through the presentation. And let's talk about using Vimtop to monitor your system in real time. You log in. It updates all these counters every 3 seconds. That might be a little bit too fast for you to actually get the information that you want, so you can hit the P key to pause it. You can hit the H key to display a little help menu in there, and then to get out of it, you hit Q. See, I use SSH to do it. That top line there gives you the uptime, how long the VCSA has been running, and then it gives you the load average. The load average metric counter is extremely important, or it's total garbage, depending who you talk to. It's the same one that Linux uses, and there's kind of a religious war whether it's useful or not. It is actually kind of a sophisticated algorithm that goes into it, so you'll have to decide whether it's useful to you or not. I found it extremely useful. Underneath that, we talk about what the processes are doing, how many you have, how many are running, how many are asleep. Blah, blah, blah. Probably the one you might not be familiar with is the zombie process, unless you're a Unix or Linux guy. And what a zombie process is, it's a process that died but can't report its death back to its parent, so it just hangs around until a process called the Reaper comes through and cleans them all out. Usually don't see any zombies. If you do start seeing a lot of zombies, probably means that your processes aren't behaving well, and so you're going to have to investigate that. You can use the PS command to see which processes are in the zombie state, and then you can track that back to its parent and figure out what's the matter. What's the matter with that process's parent? Underneath that, we get the overall utilization of the system. Remember the VAMI tool just showed how busy the CPU was, the virtual CPU? Well, this tells you why it's busy. Tells you how much of this is being run in system time, User time, that's code that's running. System is the kernel code. Nice is processes that have a higher priority. The ones you want to look at, idle, ID is idle. The WA, that's kind of an important one to keep an eye on. That's wait. It means it's waiting for a hardware. It sent something out to hardware and it's waiting for its return. Usually don't like to see very big numbers in that way. If you do, it might mean that you're having some issues with your hardware. Either you're trying to give it too much information or it's too slow. Let's see, and then we have the hardware interrupt, the software interrupt, and then the back one there, that's ST. That stands for stolen cycles. The hypervisor knows when another hypervisor takes cycles from it, and so we like to see this 0 as well. If you start seeing cycles getting stolen, usually means that you have other virtual machines that are running really fast or running really hard and trying to take those cycles from it. Take a look at the overall environment. You might need to move some of those other virtual machines to other ESX hosts so you don't get your cycles stolen. And then we break it down by CPU. Then we talk about memory. The first line is the real memory being used. This is RAM, and then we have swap. And usually you'll have more swap than RAM because everything gets loaded to memory, and if the process isn't very active, then it goes to swap. Usually not an issue. Then we get into the processes themselves, and this is where we find the interesting stuff. What processes are consuming these resources? So this is what the Vimtop chart looks like. And you're going to want to sort on these columns depending what you're concerned about. I tend to either look at memory or CPU utilization, and you can decide what columns you want to sort at by using the left-right arrow key to highlight it. You hit the Z key, and that will clear out all the sort orders. And then you use the arrow keys to select the column that you want, and then hit A or D to sort it in either ascending or descending order. And you can have multiple sort levels, 1, 2, 3. Sort on this column first, then that one, and that one. By default, it doesn't show all the counters because it has dozens and dozens of counters, but you might want to add some additional counters to it. I like to look at the process identifier. I like to look at the full command line so I know where this process came from. So to add an additional column, you hit the C key, and then you hit the space bar to select it, and that'll go ahead and add it to it. After you add those columns, then you can hit the escape key to return back. If you hit the Q key, it's going to quit Vimtop altogether, so make sure you hit the escape key. And these columns, you can have so many columns that they actually go off the screen, but you can use the left-right key to kind of go in the far right and see the columns, the counters that you need. You can also monitor disk and network activity using Vimtop. If you're there and you want to come back to look at your CPU memory, just hit the R key and it'll bring this one back. R stands for process. And this bottom line, you can see that it has a name, vCenter server. And then at the far right, you can see the command. And remember how we talked about the VPXD? It'll tell you what actual command is running there. So that way you can get a idea of what's going on. Back when I talked about adding additional vCPUs to your system, if it becomes overloaded, keep an eye on the VPXD ones, because that's really the main one that you need to keep an eye on and make sure when it gets really busy, that's usually an indicator that your overall system is busy doing stuff, and you're probably going to want to look at adding additional vCenter server, link it in, do some round robbing. You can also take a look at memory. I sorted by the percentage of memory being used. So this has percentage of memory being used, the amount of memory in megabytes, and then the virtual memory. The virtual memory is the complete data set. It includes the RAM as well as the stuff in swap. Back when we were in the VAMI tools, we saw the usage of the disk, but we didn't really see how busy they were being. In this case, again, it doesn't come out with all the columns that I like to look at. I care about latency and I/O. If you see the latency, I have 2-second latency on this disk, the DM6. Now that's just ridiculous. When you start to get latencies like that, you need to look at putting your VCSA on a different data store, or maybe taking your data store and modifying it, adding additional RAID levels, or taking it and putting to an if it's on a spinning disk, move it to a FFD. If it's on FFD, hey, maybe an NVMe will get rid of that latency. So keep an eye on your latency. Can also monitor the network with it. Again, don't see a whole lot of issues with it. I tend to look at things like drop packets, but you can get that from the VAMI tool as well. You have all these columns, you have them in the, you might want to reorder them, maybe you have one that you can't see, so real easy to do. You just use your left-right arrow key, select the column, and then use the period or the comma to shift it to the left or the right and put it in the position that you want. Real easy to do. You can see here that I moved the name from being in the first column to move it to being in the 5th column there. You get your Vimtop kind of configured how you want it, get everything set up. You don't want to do this every time you bring in Vimtop. So what you can do is write a configuration file. The way you do this is Vimtop --C, the name of your configuration file. And then when you get it configured, just hit the W key in Vimtop, and that'll write it. And if you want to use that configuration file, you do the same thing, Vimtop -C, and then give it the name of that configuration file, and it'll suck in that configuration when you start it. If you hit write without giving it the -C, it overwrites the default, which is root vimtop, vimtop.xml, and every time you start it, you'll get that configuration file. Isn't an easy way to clear that out, but you can just go ahead and delete that root vimtop.xml file, and that'll give you a nice fresh base to start from. One of the drawbacks of Vimtop is that you can't specify certain processes to examine. It looks at all the processes that it thinks is valuable, and so you get a lot of process you might not be interested in. I tend to be interested in, the Postgres processes, things like that. Fortunately, a lot of these processes that I'm interested in start with a V, so you just go over to the name column and do a descending order on the name, and all these nice V processes kind of float up to the top. You can take a look at like the VCPD, things that are going on there. You can also see that VMware, the VCSA, kicks out a lot of VCPD processes, and all these other processes are, normal database processes. Recognize those if you use just about any database. All right, so we took a look at it in real time using Vimtop. Take a look at historical. Now we want to take a look at it in historical context. Like I say, you got to become familiar with it. Looking at these numbers for a few seconds might not give you the information you need. You won't be able to figure out trending things, but you can capture that data and look at it over a longer period of time. The way you do that is with the -B option. -B, -P10, that means every 10 seconds I'm going to get a new set of counter values, and the -N6 means I'm going to do this for 6 iterations. And then I redirect it using the standard redirect out to a file name. I do notice quite a few people taking pictures here, fantastic, but I wrote a dozen articles on these, and so if you go to virtualizationreview.com and type in Vimtop, all this information and more is out there. But you're, like I said, more than welcome to take pictures, but it's also another place you can get this information. So when you type in Vimtop with the -B, instead of displaying it on the screen, it just streams it out. The first line is going to be all the names of the counters that it's going to collect, and then each additional line is going to be the value of the counters. Just looking at it, you won't be able to pick through it and figure out what you need. So I did just write kind of a quick and nasty script to go through and sort it. And what this does is it associates the name of the counter with the counter value itself. So I could kind of get an idea and take a look and see what these values are. And then if you find a value that you are interested in and want to take a look at it, you can modify it just a little bit to do it. But this isn't a very good way to examine your data for historical purposes. You know, it's very time consuming. So I'm going to show you some ways you can do it. And by the way, avoid running scripts, things like that on your VCSA. You do have the complete Linux toolset on the VCSA, but don't write scripts to do that. They tend to be very inefficient. They chew up cycles on the VCSA that you want it doing VCSA things, not scripts, things like that. So take this data, move it out to a Linux machine. Or if you're a Windows person, Windows 10 and Windows Server 2019 has a really cool tool called Windows Subsystem for Linux. Anyone hear of that? Two people. All right, I'm going to tell the rest of you about it. What it is in Windows 10, Windows Server 2019, it actually has a full-blown Linux shell running on Windows. I mean, you can have Ubuntu, you can have SUSE, you can have, I believe, Fedora. And so you can use all those great Linux commands you have from your Windows workstation. It's really, really cool. So let's go ahead and import this data in. You'll use SCP, whatever, to bring it in. And in this case, I'm going to show you how to create a quick Excel spreadsheet. Went the wrong way there. In this case, I just cut the values that I cared about, pasted them down into an Excel spreadsheet, went to Insert, Chart, picked 2D line chart, and got this chart. You know, if you have maybe one or two values you're interested in, it's kind of a quick and dirty way to do it, to show your manager that over time we're starting to consume CPU cycles, or at this time something happened. It's kind of a cute way to show just a single value. But I think what you're going to want to do is use Windows Perfmon. Perfmon has a couple advantages to it. You bring in your data set. And what's nice about using Perfmon with Vimtop is it understands the format of it. It's a common separated lines with quotes around them. So you can suck this directly into Perfmon. You don't have to do any other kind of manipulation into it. It's really neat. So what you do is you bring up Perfmon on one of your Windows systems. Just about every Windows system has it. Go to Performance Monitor, log files, bring in that log file that you caught. I always hit apply down there at the bottom because it tells me the time range of the values that I got. And so I can say, yeah, this is the right data. I did bring over the data that I thought I was bringing in. And then you'll see a blank graph. So you need to add counters to it. So again, right click or hit the little green arrow up there and say add counters. And then you select the counters that you want. And you have all the counters that you have in Vimtop. You have every one of them. And you can either display them all or select the ones that you're interested in. And then it creates this graph. All those hundreds of lines are displayed. When you do this, Perfmon by default goes from 0 to 100. Vimtop goes from 0 to 1. 99% will be displayed as 0.99 as a decimal form rather than 100 or 99%. So you do have to change the scale. Again, right click in the Perfmon set scale. You can take a look at it, and then if you see a outlying line, one that you're interested in, you can just click on it. It'll bold it, and it'll tell you what counter that is. Another neat thing about Perfmon is that it tells you the high and low and average watermarks of it. So for this period of time, I only selected a subset of the entire time range. You can see that the average of it was 98, and it had a maximum of 100%. So that's kind of a really nice feature. And this little sliding box, you can move it back and forth to get a better idea of what's happening when, or you can pull each end of the slider and go back to the full view of it. All right. So we talked about monitoring the VCSA using the VAMI tools. We talked about looking at processes using the Vimtop. Let me give you a couple of examples of issues that I had and how took care of them. I was working with a coworker, and his vSphere client was really slow, and the VCS command line wasn't very responsive. So we went ahead and started digging into it, brought up the vSphere client, brought up the charts for the VCSA, and you can see that we have some vCPUs on it that are, maxing out at about 100%. Not a good thing. So we went ahead and brought up the VAMI tool. VAMI tool showed us something a little bit different. It showed us that it was only using 50%. Something you need to keep in mind, the VAMI tool gives you the aggregate of all the vCPUs. It doesn't break it down in a per vCPU. So in this case, we had one vCPU at 100%, the other one at 0, and so the average is 50. So something you need to be aware of. Knew this wasn't right, and by the way, when we get back down to 0, that's after we solved the problem and straightened it out. So we started digging into it, brought up Vimtop, took a look in it, saw, we were getting some heavy CPU utilization on it. Then we sorted by the CPU percent busy. Notice a couple things here. Usually Vimtop is a very reasonably lightweight, maybe 1-2% of CPU utilization. Well, we had two of them going, and one was at less than 1%, and the other one was at 98% CPU utilization. Got thinking about this, started looking around, thinking what I did. And then it occurred to me that when actually getting ready for another course, I was collecting a bunch of data, and what I did is I set up a bunch of Vimtops to run in parallel, only I had them running in serial, so they were all going on at the same time. It was just clobbering my system. So once I killed that Vimtop, everything was back to normal. So Vimtop, lightweight process, a couple things you need to take away. One, Vimtop is a lightweight process, shouldn't be consuming a lot of resources. Two is Tom shouldn't try and program because things go wrong occasionally. But after we killed it, everything went back to normal. This one I actually got a call from another course developer. He said, vSphere client's really not acting well, and the performance graphs are taking a long time to build. So we brought up a VAMI tool, took a look at it, saw CPU utilization is about 50%, which could mean that one vCPU is maxed out. So we dialed into it in a smaller time frame. Notice this interesting trend where it'd be busy for 3 minutes and then it'd be quiet for 2 minutes and then it'd be busy for 3 minutes and then quiet for 2 minutes. And again, this wasn't a real active system. Talked to each other, couldn't quite figure out what was going on. Brought up Vimtop, took a look at the processes, and we noticed during that active time that the VCPD was maxing out, 100% utilization. We weren't doing anything. Then we also noticed that vCenter server, that VPXD, wasn't as busy, but it kind of coincided when the vPostgres process was busy. Got thinking about it, then we ran a netstat during these times and realized that the netstat, we had a IP address that would connect during those times. When it got busy, followed the IP address down to one of our coworkers. I said, what's going on? He said, I'm not doing anything. He said, no, what's going on? And what he was doing is he was writing some Power CLI for another course he was developing. And he would go out and do a git stat on every item in the VCSA, and it was just hammering it. So we talked to him, and we figured out a way to only get certain inventory items. But that's why the Postgres was so busy, because it was pulling git stat, just pulls a lot of information from the database, and then the VPXD, of course, was the connection doing the business logic. This quote is from the great American philosopher and heavyweight boxing champion, Mike Tyson. And I take it to heart, because I think we all have these plans, things are going to go well until Mike Tyson punches you in the mouth. Then things kind of go south. And that's when we need to recoup, get ourselves together, use tools like Vimtop and VAMI. I just wonder if Mike Tyson bothers me using his quote for this Vimtop and VAMI thing. And by the way, I had to fight to get this slide in here. The slide police didn't think it was appropriate, but I liked it, so we put it in there. So we use tools to overcome when we do have issues. So to kind of wrap up, you monitor your VCSA using VAMI tools, using the vSphere client. Know what's normal on your system, know when you're overutilizing your CPU storage, things like that. Know what the baseline is, and know what your trending is. When you do see you have an issue, use tools like Vimtop to really dive down and find out what the problem is and if it's expected or not expected. Don't parse historical data on your VCSA. Save those cycles for VCSA stuff. Like I said, Windows subsystem for Linux, if you got some Windows systems, works great. There are some resources out here. The official documentation is fairly terse. I guarantee you in this session I gave you 4 times as much information as you can get from the official documentation. I have written a lot of articles on this, virtualizationreview.com. Just type in Vimtop in the search or Vimtop Fenton, and you'll see a bunch of articles. A lot of interesting things you can do, walk you through a bunch of different stuff. The way I got exposed to this is I was working on the Optimize and Scale class with Carla. Carla is our senior course developer. She's been with the company for 17 years. And we were looking at interesting things, so we ended up putting this in the Optimize and Scale course. And if you haven't taken the Optimize and Scale course and really want to dig into this, it's a fantastic course, 3 days long, 70% hands-on, and it's only taught by our most tenured instructors. These are the experts. You cannot beg them. So, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. I did set 3 goals for this session. First is how to use VAMI and Vimtop. Second is how to create historical charts with Vimtop so you can do long-term analysis. And then third, I wanted to give you some examples as we went through. I spent a fair amount of time putting this course developer, and I'd ask that you guys just spend a minute or two and fill out this survey and let me know if I hit those three key points and how I did. If you have any comments, I definitely enjoy reading those. So thank you all for coming. We do have some mics if anyone has any questions, or I'll be up here out in the hall if someone wants to grab me.
Hi. Little question about the update button on the VCSA regarding VCHA.
What's that?
I got a little question regarding the update button on the VCSA regarding VCHA.
Okay.
The process,
No, that's something you'd want to talk to Duncan about, the high availability thing. Yeah, he's the expert in that. So grab him.
I just want to say thank you. That's the best session so far.
I'm blessed. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. It really means a lot to me.